Right now, you are telling yourself a story about why your life is the way it is, about what was done to you, about what you were not given, about the advantages other people had that you did not, about the circumstances that made your path harder than it needed to be. And the story is not a lie. That is the most important thing to understand. The story is not a lie. The disadvantage was real. The unfairness was real. What was done to you was real. What you were not given was real. All of it. Real. And it is destroying you, not the circumstances. The story you have built around the circumstances. The specific posture of a person who has decided that what happened to them is the explanation for what they have not built, who has positioned the wound at the center of their identity, who has made the unfairness the reason, and who wakes up every morning and reaches for that reason before they reach for anything else. That posture has a name. And the name is not sensitivity. It is not awareness. It is not the reasonable response to genuine hardship. It is self-pity. And self-pity is the most expensive thing a person can carry, because it feels like weight-bearing, it feels like honesty, it feels like the only fair response to an unfair situation, and it produces nothing, every day, while the life you are capable of waits on the other side of the decision to put it down. In 16th century Japan, there was a warlord born into circumstances so disadvantaged that self-pity would have been completely justified. His name was Oda Nobunaga. His father died when he was 17. He inherited a fractured clan, surrounded by enemies, dismissed by every major power in Japan as too young, too isolated, too poorly resourced to survive his first winter in power. His own retainers doubted him, his allies abandoned him, his enemies publicly calculated how long it would take to erase him. He had the circumstances, he had the justification. He had everything required to make the story of what had been done to him the center of his identity. He made none of it the center of anything. He went on to conquer half of Japan. Not because the circumstances changed, because he understood something about self-pity that people who carry it never want to examine. Self-pity is not a response to the wound. It is a choice to make the wound your residence. And a man who lives in his wound cannot build anything outside of it. His hands are full of the injury. There is nothing left to build with. This is the story of how that changes. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The soldier who had made his suffering his identity. Owari Province, Japan. 1562. Kenji was 29 years old and had spent 7 years making sure that everyone around him understood exactly what had been done to him. Not loudly, not with obvious complaint. In the specific quiet way that self-pity operates in intelligent people. Through the story always present at the edge of every conversation, the father who had been unjust, the opportunity that had been taken by someone with connections he had not possessed, the years of service that had not been rewarded the way they should have been, the specific accumulation of unfairnesses that had produced the distance between where he was and where he should have been. The story was always there, ready. An explanation for every gap, a reason for every distance, a justification for everything that had not yet happened. And the people around him had heard the story many times. They had been sympathetic at first. The circumstances were real. The unfairnesses were documented. The wound had been genuine. But something had shifted in how they listened over 7 years. Not cruelty, exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of people who have watched someone carry a wound long past the point where the wound required carrying, who have watched the wound become the person, the injury become the identity, the story become the explanation for everything, including the things the story had nothing to do with. Kenji did not see this. Self-pity has a specific blindness. It focuses with extraordinary precision on the evidence that confirms the story, and filters with equal precision the evidence that challenges it. He saw the unfairnesses clearly. He did not see the choices he had made in response to them. He saw what had been taken. He did not see what he had failed to build with what remained. He saw the wound. He did not see that he had moved into it. The moment of rupture came during a mission that went wrong, not catastrophically, in the specific way that reveals something about the person inside the difficulty rather than the difficulty itself. 3 men had been assigned a task. The task had not gone as planned. Circumstances had made it harder than it should have been. All three had faced the same circumstances. Two of them had adapted, had found within the difficult situation something workable, had produced a result that was imperfect and real. Kenji had explained, had documented in detail why the circumstances made success impossible, had produced an account of the difficulty that was thorough and accurate and completely useless. His commanding officer heard the account, heard the other two men's results, and then said something to Kenji in a quiet voice that carried no particular anger, which made it land harder than anger would have. "You are the most articulate man in this unit about why things cannot be done, and the least useful when they need to be." Kenji felt the heat rise, began the story. The commanding officer held up a hand. "I know the story. Everyone knows the story. The question is what you are going to build with the time that the story is not consuming." He walked away. Kenji stood in the space those words left, and felt something he had not felt in 7 years. Not because the words were cruel, because they were accurate. And accurate words about the thing you have been protecting land differently than any other kind. He did not sleep that night. And in the early morning before light, he sat with a question he had been successfully avoiding for 7 years. What have I built while I have been carrying the story? The answer arrived without negotiation. Nothing. Chapter 2. The Principle. Tenka Fubu. Rule the realm by force of will, not by right of circumstance. 2 weeks after that night, Kenji stood in a courtyard, where Oda Nobunaga's approach to command was being taught by a senior strategist named Mori-sensei. Not because he had sought the teaching, because something in him had understood that the teaching was the only direction available. Mori-sensei was not a gentle man. He did not approach difficulty with softness. He had spent 30 years in proximity to Oda Nobunaga and had absorbed something of the way the warlord occupied the world, directly, without the management of distance between himself and the truth of any situation. He looked at Kenji once when he arrived, the look of a man reading something quickly. Then he began, not with Kenji specifically, with a principle. Nobunaga was 17 when his father died, he said. He inherited a clan that senior retainers expected to collapse within a year, surrounded by enemies who were older, better resourced, and more established. He had every circumstance available to produce a man who spent his life explaining why the circumstances had prevented him from becoming anything. He became the most feared warlord in Japan. He paused. The difference was not talent. It was not resources. It was not the circumstances improving. The circumstances did not improve. He was attacked from every direction for the entirety of his campaign. The difference was a single principle that governed every decision he made. He called it Tenka Fubu, rule the realm by force of will, not by right, not by inheritance, not by the circumstances finally aligning, by the specific daily decision to act on what was within his power, regardless of what had been done to him, regardless of what he had not been given, regardless of what the circumstances suggested was possible. He looked at Kenji directly. Self-pity says the circumstances determine the outcome. Tenka Fubu says the will determines the outcome, and the will is yours regardless of the circumstances. Nobody can take it. Nobody can damage it. It does not require fair conditions to operate. It does not require the wound to heal before it becomes available. It is available right now, in this moment, in whatever circumstance you are carrying. The will to act on what is within your power. Even while the wound is present, even while the unfairness is real, even while the story is true. The story can be true and still not be the answer. Kenji sat with this. "I am not saying your wound is not real," Mori-sensei said. "I have no interest in dismissing what happened to you. I am saying that the wound as residence is not the same as the wound as history. Nobunaga carried wounds, real ones, betrayals that cost him campaigns, losses that cost him men he could not replace. He did not move into them, he acknowledged them, and continued, because Tenka Fubu does not wait for the conditions to be fair. It acts on what is available, every day, regardless." Something broke in Kenji. Not dramatically. The specific quiet break of a man who has finally been told that the residence he has been living in is a choice, not a necessity. a choice made every day for 7 years and available to be made differently. Starting now, if you wake up reaching for the story before you reach for anything else, if the wound has become the explanation for everything, if the circumstances have become the reason, this teaching is for you. Subscribe to Viking Mindset. Every week, the warrior disciplines for putting down the story and picking up what remains. Walk this path with us. Chapter 3. The Test. 21 days without the story as the answer. Mori-sensei gave Kenji a practice. Simple, brutal. For 21 days, whenever you reach for the story, whenever the wound appears as the explanation for why something has not happened or cannot happen, you will replace the story with a single question. What is within my power right now? Not what was done to me, not what I was not given, not what the circumstances have made difficult. What is within my power right now, in this specific moment? And then you will act on the answer. Kenji began the following morning. Day 1. The story appeared 11 times before noon. He counted. 11 moments where the wound presented itself as the explanation, for small things, for large things, for things that had nothing to do with the original circumstances. The habit was so deep, it had spread to everything. Every difficulty filtered through the story, every obstacle explained by it, every gap in his results attributed to it. 11 times before noon, and 11 times he stopped, asked the question, what is within my power right now? And answered it. The answers were small, uncomfortable in their smallness, not the dramatic reversals the story had always implied were required. Small, specific actions, available in the present moment, requiring nothing to change first. By day 3, something painful became visible. A significant portion of what he had attributed to the circumstances for 7 years had, when the story was removed and the question was asked, available action within it. Not easy action, available action, things that could be done that he had not been doing because the story had been where the energy went, and the story had been producing the feeling of weight-bearing without producing anything else. Day 5, the story fought back, with the most sophisticated version of itself. It did not present as complaint. It presented as context, the appropriate understanding of a complex situation that required the full history to make sense of, the reasonable man's acknowledgement of the real factors at play. It sounded so reasonable that Kenji almost did not recognize it. He caught it, asked the question, what is within my power right now? And acted. Day 8. Mori-sensei observed him during a difficult task. Afterward, he said one thing. You are beginning to face the direction of the action rather than the direction of the explanation. Kenji understood. For 7 years he had been facing the explanation, everything oriented toward the story, the wound behind him, the circumstances surrounding him, the justification always available, and the action somewhere in front of him, difficult to reach. Because you cannot move effectively towards something you are not facing. He was beginning to face forward, not because the wound had healed, because he had stopped turning to look at it every time a decision required making. Day 14. The practice produced something unexpected, a task that genuinely was made harder by the original circumstances, real, documentable, the kind of difficulty that the story had always been most justified in referencing, and he sat with it, asked the question, what is within my power right now? And found inside the genuine difficulty more available action than the story had ever allowed him to look for, because the story had always stopped at the difficulty, named it, documented it, used it as the destination. The question moved through it, past the naming, past the documentation, into what was workable inside it. There was always something workable inside it. He had just never looked past the naming long enough to find it. Day 21. Mori-sensei asked him one question. How many times in the past 21 days did you reach for the story? Kenji thought. Fewer every week, he said. Not gone, fewer. Mori-sensei nodded. The story does not disappear. It loses authority. Every time you ask the question instead of reaching for the story, You practice a different response to difficulty, and the practiced response becomes the automatic one. Not immediately, over time, over the specific unglamorous repetition of the question every day, until the question is what appears first, and the story is what has to wait. Chapter 4. Warrior Psychology. The science of what self-pity actually does to the mind that feeds it. One evening, Mori-sensei gathered the men he was training and spoke directly. "Tonight," he said, "I want to explain what self-pity actually is, not as a moral failing, as a mechanism. So you understand what you are working with. The brain is a pattern recognition system. It is constantly searching for explanations for outcomes. When something goes wrong, it needs an account of why. And the account it reaches for first is always the most available one, the one that has been used before, the one that is already well worn, the one that requires the least new processing. If the account of external circumstance as the cause of negative outcomes has been used consistently, it becomes the automatic account, not a decision, a default. The pattern the brain runs without checking whether it is the most accurate account available or the most useful one. And self-pity feeds this default. Every time the wound is referenced as the explanation for a current difficulty, even a difficulty it has nothing to do with, the pattern is reinforced. The brain becomes more efficient at producing the external account, less practiced at asking what is within my power, until the external account is so automatic, so immediate, so well worn, that it arrives before the situation has been fully assessed, and shapes the assessment before the assessment can shape it. This is why self-pity spreads, why it moves from the original wound into areas it has no legitimate connection to. Because the brain is not checking whether the account is accurate, it is running the most practiced pattern. And the most practiced pattern has been the story. Nobunaga understood this about his own men. He said it plainly. A man who explains his failure is practicing explanation. A man who responds to his failure is practicing response. And men become what they practice, not what they intend, what they repeatedly do. He ran his campaigns accordingly. He did not allow the story, not because the stories were false, because the practice of the story was producing soldiers who were skilled at explanation and poor at response. And response was the only thing that won campaigns. Marcus Aurelius wrote this in his private journals. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was the emperor of Rome. He had legitimate grievances, genuine unfairnesses, real wounds from real betrayals. He wrote none of them as the reason. He wrote them as the condition, and then he wrote what he did inside the condition, because the condition was not within his control, and the doing was, and he had learned through 30 years of governing an empire, that directing attention at what is not within your control is attention removed from what is, and a man with his attention on what is not within his control is a man who has made himself powerless by choice, while the actual power available to him sits unused, because his attention is elsewhere. Kenji absorbed this sitting in the evening quiet. He had spent 7 years with his attention on what had been done to him. Real attention, significant attention, attention that could have been directed at what was within his power every single day. For 7 years, he could not get those years back. He could make a different choice about the ones that remained. Chapter 5. The First Transformation. The mission where the story did not appear. 3 months into the practice, Kenji was assigned a task. Difficult. The kind that in the previous 7 years would have immediately activated the story, would have been filtered through the wound before the assessment even began. He sat with it, asked the question, what is within my power here? Mapped it. The genuine constraints, the real limitations, the things that were not within his power, and the things that were. The things that were more than the story had ever allowed him to see, because the story had always stopped at the constraints. He moved through the constraints into what was workable, and he built something inside the difficulty that the explanation could not have built. Not perfect, real. The commanding officer received the result, said nothing immediately, then later, simply, this is different. Kenji knew what he meant, not the result exactly, the direction it had come from, not the story, the question, not what had been done to him, what was within his power. He brought this to Mori-sensei. The old strategist listened, then asked, when did the story appear during the mission? Kenji thought carefully. Twice, he said. Both times at the hardest points, when the constraint was most real. And what happened? I asked the question, and it appeared less useful than the question. Mori-sensei nodded. This is the turning point, not when the story disappears, when it appears less useful than the alternative. Because the story has always felt necessary. The explanation for the difficulty, the account of why things are hard, the reasonable response to genuine unfairness. But useful. Useful was never what it was. And the moment you can feel the difference between what feels necessary and what is actually useful, the story begins to lose its grip. Not because you have healed, because you have found something more useful than the wound. And usefulness is a more powerful gravity than familiarity. Eventually. Chapter 6. Deep Training Arc. The campaign, where he had the most legitimate reason he had ever had. 5 months after the practice began, something happened that tested everything. The original source of the wound reappeared, not as memory, in the present. The person whose actions 7 years ago had produced the circumstances Kenji had been carrying appeared in a context that required interaction, required cooperation, required Kenji to work alongside the person who had generated the most legitimate material the story had ever had. The story activated with a force he had not encountered in 5 months. Every version of it, every documented unfairness, every specific instance, all of it present and loud and completely justified by the actual presence of the actual source. He went to Mori-sensei before the interaction, stated what was happening. The old strategist was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This is the real test, not the practice sessions, not the small daily question. This, the moment when the most legitimate version of the story is directly in front of you, and the question still has to be asked." He looked at Kenji. What did Nobunaga do when he faced the men who had betrayed him, when the most legitimate versions of his wounds appeared in the present? Kenji knew the history. He used them, he said. Whatever they had, whatever they could provide. He directed it toward the campaign, not because the betrayal was acceptable, because the campaign was more important than the accounting. Mori-sensei nodded. He did not pretend the wound did not exist. He did not perform forgiveness. He made a different calculation. What does the campaign require? And the campaign required what the man could provide. So he used him, with clear eyes, without pretending the history was not the history, and without letting the history determine what was possible now. He paused. The wound is real. The history is true. And the question is still, what is within your power right now? Even with the source of the wound standing in front of you. Even with the most justified version of the story available. The question does not change. Kenji went into the interaction. The story appeared repeatedly. Each time he asked the question, what is within my power right now? The interaction was not warm. It was not resolved. It did not produce the closure that the story had always implied was required before moving forward. It produced something more useful than closure. A result. Specific. Real. Built from what was within his power inside a situation that contained his most legitimate reason to produce nothing. He sat with Mori-sensei afterward. The old strategist looked at him. How do you feel? Kenji thought about it honestly. Less burdened, he said. Not because the wound is healed, because I did not let it make the decision. Mori-sensei was quiet. Then, that is the difference between a wound as history and a wound as residence. The history is carried. The residence is lived in. You carried it today. You did not live in it. That is not a small thing. That is everything. In the final weeks of the campaign, something arrived in a quiet moment between tasks. This practice of asking what is within my power instead of reaching for the story. It is not a practice for one soldier in one campaign in 1 century. Every person alive who has made their wound their identity, who wakes reaching for the story before anything else, who has positioned the unfairness at the center of everything, needs this question, not as dismissal of the wound, as the practice of carrying it without living in it. At Viking Mindset, we keep this discipline alive, the warrior practice of Tenka Fubu, Rule your realm by force of will, not by right of circumstance, not when conditions are fair, not when the wound has healed, now, with what is within your power. Every day. Subscribe to Viking Mindset. Every week the ancient warrior disciplines for putting down the story and picking up what remains. Because what remains is more than the story has been allowing you to see. Kenji closed his eyes in the field and felt the question arrive before the story did. For the first time, without effort, automatic. What is within my power right now? Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The man who arrived with 7 years of the most legitimate story Kenji had ever heard. 1 year after Mori-sensei's teaching, a man arrived at the unit Kenji now helped to lead. 30 years old. The wound visible immediately to anyone who knew what to look for. Not complaint. The specific, careful quality of a man who has arranged his entire presence around the documentation of what was done to him. Whose intelligence is fully deployed in the service of the story. Whose capabilities are visible and almost entirely redirected into the accounting of why they have not produced what they should have produced. Kenji watched him for 1 week, then sat with him. He did not begin with the story. He began with one question. "What are you carrying?" the man told him. Kenji listened without interrupting. The story was thorough, specific, documented. The wound was real. The unfairness was genuine. The circumstances had been legitimately harder than they should have been, every word true. When the man finished, Kenji was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long have you been carrying that?" 7 years, the man said. Kenji looked at him. "I carried mine for 7 years too." The man looked up. "And what did 7 years of carrying it build?" The man was very still. "Nothing," he said finally. "Everything is still the same. The wound has not healed. The circumstances have not changed, and I have not built anything." Kenji nodded. "Because the carrying was where the energy went. Not into the building, into the accounting, into the maintenance of the record, into the daily practice of making the wound the first thing reached for. And the building requires the same energy the accounting has been consuming." He paused. "I am not going to tell you the wound is not real. It is real. I am not going to tell you the unfairness was acceptable. It was not. I am going to ask you one question, and the question is not comfortable." The man looked at him. Kenji asked it. 7 years from now, if nothing changes, if you continue carrying the story exactly as you have been carrying it, what will you have?" The man was quiet for a long time. Then, "More years of the same, and the wound will still be there." "Yes," Kenji said. "The wound does not heal from the carrying." He reached into his robe, placed a scroll on the ground between them. On it, a single question written clearly. "What is within my power right now?" Not what was done to you. Not what you were not given. Not what the circumstances have made difficult. What is within your power right now? In this specific moment. The man looked at the question. Kenji continued. Oda Nobunaga was dismissed as a boy, surrounded by enemies as a young man, betrayed by people he had trusted. He had the story. He had the justification. He had everything required to make the wound the center of his identity for the rest of his life. He asked the question instead. Every day, every campaign, every moment when the story presented itself as the answer. What is within my power? And the answer to that question, acted on every day for the rest of his life, built half of Japan. Not because the circumstances became fair, because he stopped making fairness the requirement for action. The man picked up the scroll, read the question, read it again. Then he said something Kenji had not expected. "I know the answer. I have always known the answer. I just kept reaching for the story first. And by the time I had finished reaching for it, the day was shaped around it, and the answer to the question had nowhere to go." Kenji looked at him. Yes, that is exactly what the story does. It shapes the day before the question can. So the practice is simple. Ask the question first, before the story, every morning, before you reach for the wound, before you reach for the accounting, before the circumstances present themselves as the explanation. What is within my power right now? Answer it, act on it. Then let the story say whatever it says. You will not be listening. You will be building. The man held the scroll. Something had shifted in his face. The expression of a man who has spent 7 years facing the direction of the wound, and is turning, not away from it, toward what is in front of him, toward what is within his power, toward what 7 years of building instead of explaining might have produced, and what the next 7 years can still produce, if the question comes before the story, every day, starting now. They sat together in the quiet of the early morning, the unit preparing around them, men moving through the work of the day, some of them carrying stories, some of them carrying questions, the difference visible in how they moved, in the direction they faced, in what they were building versus what they were explaining. This is what Oda Nobunaga built his campaign on. Not fairness, not healed wounds, not the circumstances finally aligning. The question, every day, what is within my power? And the answer acted on, regardless of the story, regardless of the wound, regardless of what had been done to him, or what he had not been given, or how hard the path had been, or how legitimate the explanation would have been. Regardless, because the campaign required building, and the building required the question, and the question required the decision to stop reaching for the story first. That decision is available to you, right now, in this moment, before the story forms, before the wound presents itself as the answer. What is within your power, right now? Act on it. Subscribe to Viking Mindset. Every week, the warrior disciplines for the man who is ready to stop explaining the gap and start closing it. Every week, the ancient practices for carrying the wound without living in it, for turning toward the building instead of the accounting, because the circumstances are real, and they are not the answer, and the answer has been available every day. In the one question the story has been arriving before. What is within your power? Ask it first, every morning, before anything else, and then build. That is the warrior's way.